Great. So Mr. Block is going to talk to us about market alternatives to government, roads, oceans, and space. Walter E. Block is Harold E. Worth Endowed Chair and Professor of Economics, College of Business, Loyola University, New Orleans, and Senior Fellow at the Mises Institute. He earned his PhD in Economics at Columbia University in 1972. He has taught at Rutgers, SUNY, Stony Brook, Baruch, CUNY, Holy Cross, and the University of Central Arkansas.
I can't hear anything. Am I supposed to be hearing something?
He is the author.
Can you hear that?
Now I can hear.
Okay. He lectures widely on college campuses, delivers seminars around the world, and appears regularly on television and radio shows. He is the Schlarbaum Laureate Mises Institute 2011, has won the Loyola University Research Award in 2005 and 2008, and the Mises Institute's Rothbard Medal of Freedom 2005, and the Duke's Academics Award at Loyola University 2007. Professor Block counts among his friends Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard. He has converted to libertarianism by Ayn Rand. Block is old enough to have played chess with Friedrich Hayek and once met with Ludwig von Mises and shaking his hand. Block has never washed that hand since. So if you shake his hand, it's pretty dirty, but what the heck, you channel Mises. Mr. Block, welcome to Liberty International World Conference, Medellin 2021.
Hello, I guess it's my turn to speak now. I hope that you can hear me a lot better than I could hear the introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes?
Just fine.
Good. The only thing I heard from the introduction is about shaking the hand of Mises, so I knew that there was an introduction, but it didn't come through to me clearly, and I hope that I'll be able to hear you better than I heard the announcer introducing me, because I'm hoping to speak for just maybe 15 or 20 minutes, because most of what I enjoy doing is not so much lecturing, but rather discussing back and forth. Because I really don't know the audience, I'm not sure exactly what to say, but my topic is what is libertarianism, so I'll mention that. But before I get into it, I just wanted to mention that my friend Mark Victor is going to be speaking tomorrow. And he is the head of this new group called Live and Let Live, which is a very libertarian group, and I recommend him highly to you. Sometimes I'm asked what's the best way to promote libertarianism, and that's certainly one way. Another way is the Mises Institute. Another way is what I do, teaching at a university. We have a lot of think tanks. In the United States, there's this thing called the Free State Project, where the idea is everyone should move to a small state, a low population. They picked New Hampshire, and they can magnify their effect in that way. Okay, let me get into what I was planning on speaking about. What is libertarianism? And the way I would say what libertarianism is that it is two sides of a coin. On one side of the coin is the non-aggression principle. Do not initiate violence against anyone else against their will. Keep your hands to yourself unless you have the permission of other people. Don't grab their property, what have you. And I think most people, you ask the average person in the street, even a socialist or a fascist, and they're probably going to say, yeah, that's what the law should be. The law should stop murder and rape and theft and kidnapping and arson and things like that. It's just when you get to the implications of that, then it's another matter. Okay, so that's one side of the coin. And, it's like in a box. If you punch somebody in the nose and you're in the boxing match and they've agreed to be punched above the belt, well, then they can't call you for assault and battery if you punch them in the nose, and you can't do that with them either. Okay, so much for the non-aggression principle. But we also need the other side of the libertarian coin, and that is private property rights. Because there's this young man sitting on the lower right of my screen. He's got a nice jacket and a nice shirt. He's got the one hand up here like this, and he's got that nice coat. There he is, he's raising his hand, so he and I are now connecting. And I'm going to go grab his coat. I'm going to go down to Colombia and grab that coat. Have I violated the non-aggression principle? Well, it all depends on who's the proper owner of that coat. Now, it just so happens I've never seen the coat before. I'm sure it's this young man's coat. But if he stole that coat from me yesterday, well, then if I repossess it and he tries to stop me, he's the criminal, not me. So in order for the non-aggression principle to work, you need a theory of private property rights. Who owns that coat? Because if I just grab the coat, you can't tell whether I'm the criminal or he's the criminal. It all depends upon who is the proper owner of that coat. Now, as it happens, as I said, I never saw that coat before. It's his coat, so if I start grabbing it, I'm violating the non-aggression principle. But it depends intimately upon who is the proper owner of that coat. So libertarians also have a theory of private property rights. And the theory of private property rights is we all own ourselves. I own me, you guys own yourselves, so we all own ourselves. And therefore kidnapping is theft of property, and slavery is certainly theft of property. Then John Locke and Murray Rothbard say that how do you get virgin territory into ownership? Well, you mix your labor with it. That you own yourself, you own your labor, and now you mix your labor with some land, or you domesticate a cow, and now you own the cow and you own the land, and you clear the land and you put in a crop. So that would be, so we have three stages. First, you own yourself. Second, you own all the virgin territory, or cows, or sheep, or animals like that. And third, you can properly own anything based on legitimate title transfer. And Robert Nozick had that phrase, which I like very much, another eminent libertarian in addition to Murray Rothbard, and John Locke, I suppose, on this issue. And here the idea is I clear some land and I grow some corn, and you domesticate a cow and you get some milk, and now we trade, we have barter. And now I own the milk even though I didn't produce it, and you own the corn even though you didn't produce it, but we can trace it back to a voluntary activity based on private property. So to me, that is the essence of libertarianism. And the most interesting thing is, well, what are the implications of this? What are the implications of libertarianism? And I've picked a few issues to discuss, and hopefully I'll get through them in about 10, 12, 15 minutes, and then we will have a discussion about these things. The first one is socialism. Well, what's the libertarian view on socialism? Well, it all depends upon what kind of socialism we're talking about. Now, there are two kinds of socialism. One is the economic definition of socialism, where, what is it, people, the government owns all the means of production. The government owns the mines and the forests and the factories and the stores and the trains and the airplanes and everything. Well, that's not really compatible with libertarianism, because where did the government get this from? They got it from us who produced it, and we didn't agree to give it to government, so that's a problem. So we would oppose that kind of socialism. But there's another kind of socialism, and that's the from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That's another definition of socialism, and there, I think it's compatible with libertarianism if it's agreed upon. For example, in Israel, they have the kibbutz, or there's the commune, or the religious order, where people adhere to this doctrine, and if they do it voluntarily, that's fine. The average family adheres to this doctrine. A little girl who's age 10 in accordance with reason. And the average family is socialist, but it's a voluntary socialist, so it's compatible with libertarianism. There's that joke, not about the second type of socialism, but the first one. And here the joke is that if a young man at 20 is not a socialist, it shows he has no heart. If he's still a socialist at 50, it shows he has no brain. Okay, so that's the libertarian take on socialism. What about this? I'm now in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I spend my summer this year. And you'll never guess what's happening. There's this park called Stanley Park. Beautiful park of many, many acres. And they found coyotes in there, and the coyotes are biting people. And what's that? And what I did is I wrote an op-ed on this, and I said, what we ought to do is privatize the Stanley Park, and surely the owners of Stanley Park will make sure that there are no coyotes running around biting people. And whereas the present owners are the government. The city government owns Stanley Park. My motto here is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize it all. Namely, the goal of libertarianism is private property every square inch. And I have actually 3 books on this. One is we should privatize the roads and highways. Why? Because in the United States, I don't know the statistics in Colombia, but in the United States, some 40,000 people a year die on the roads. And my claim is that if different people own roads, we would have much better roads, much less killing, and much less motor vehicle accidents. Another one is we should privatize oceans, rivers, and lakes. Why? Well, because we have the tragedy of the commons. We're running out of fish, because if it's not owned by someone, people don't take care of it. If it's unowned, everybody grabs. So we should have privatization. My 3rd book on this notion is we should privatize the space race. When governments were running out of rocket ships, the rocket ship would go up and the rocket ship would come down, and that would be it for the rocket ship. The rocket ship had to be thrown away. Now we have several billionaires who are running rocket ships, and they reuse the rocket ship. Imagine if I took a plane trip from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada to Colombia, and after the trip was over, they had to throw away the plane. Do you know how expensive air travel would be? It would be horrible. And so those are my 3 ideas. And now another one, not only are there coyotes, but I am spending my time in North Vancouver, which is a suburb of Vancouver, and it's right near a bunch of forests. And guess what's happening? A bunch of bears come down and they try to get the garbage and they frighten people. Well, who owns those forests? Government. So they kill the bears every once in a while. I tell you, if those forests surrounding North Vancouver were privately owned, we would sue them and make sure they keep their bears to themselves. So I think private property rights are a way of solving all sorts of problems. Another problem that they're having nowadays is in the United States, I hope you're not having that in your country, is this thing called critical race theory. Critical race theory is the idea that all whites are racist and evil, and we shouldn't follow Martin Luther King's statement about judging people by the content of their character. We should judge them by the color of their skin. So now the question comes, well, should this be taught in the schools? Should this be taught in high school? Should this be taught in university? Some people say yes, some people say no. How can we solve that problem? Privatize all the schools, and then some schools will teach it and other schools won't. And people will then sort themselves out as to which school they want to go to. The reason we have pretty good shirts and pretty good coats and pretty good shoes is because we have capitalism, we have markets, we have freedom. So I'm just trying to apply that to anything I can. Let me try 2 more areas, and one is COVID and one is drug legalization. What's going on with COVID? People disagree on COVID. Some people are hawks. Hawk is somebody that says you have to stay 6 feet apart, you have to wear a mask, you have to get a vaccine, and they're very adamant that we should get we should do all these things. And then there are the doves. The doves say, well, it's not really that dangerous, and that the government is intrusive, and the government should leave us alone because this is a violation of freedom. My take on this, and I had an article on this in the Journal of Libertarian Studies, which I regard as the preeminent scholarly journal of libertarianism. My take on this is, I'm an economist, so I believe in specialization and division of labor. Do we as libertarians know how contagious and how deadly this disease is? No, we don't know. We're not doctors, we're not health professionals. As libertarians, all we are people who believe in the non-aggression principle and private property rights. So I'm saying we should have a dignified silence. We libertarians don't have to answer every question, especially if the question requires knowledge that we just don't have. I'm an economist. What do I know about the contagion of disease or the severity of disease? Or what do I know about the vaccine, whether it's safe and in 5 years or not there'll be birth defects or who knows what will happen? Is it ever possible to have compulsory vaccination? Yes, under libertarian views. I once was visiting a family, and their 12-year-old boy was shooting arrows at a tree. And these were not the arrows, toy arrows. These were not arrows with rubber tips. These were arrows that you use to hunt. These were arrows that could kill people. So I said to the parents of the 12-year-old boy, you can't allow him to shoot the arrow at the tree, even though it was a wide trunk, because if the arrow gets past, he can kill someone. They said, oh, well, he's got good aim. I said, well, how would you like it if somebody, a neighbor, was shooting arrows in your direction, and they said he had good aim? The point is that this is a threat. Now look, suppose, just posit, arguendo, suppose that the COVID was so dangerous that if you had it, you would kill other people just by exhaling. Well, then I think it would be justified, not so much for the government, but whoever's in charge, I would say private police, to compel people, not to put you in jail if you didn't, but to grab you and put that thing in your arm and make you take that vaccine, because otherwise you'd be shooting arrows at people. Has the government come anywhere near close to demonstrating justification for this? No. The burden of proof is on he who wants to use violence against other people. And defensive violence is justified. And if COVID were such, I'm just saying arguendo, I'm not saying it is, but if it were, then it would be justified. Has the government met its burden of proof? Or has anyone met any burden of proof? No. They've been lying about all sorts of statistics. My favorite one is a motorcyclist died in a motorcycle accident. He had COVID, and they counted it as a COVID death. I mean, so they come nowhere near making the case for that. Okay, one last subject, and that is drug legalization. Now, I don't know the situation in Colombia, but I know a little bit about it in Mexico. And in Mexico, the drug gangs fight the military on almost even terms. And they kill all sorts of people, the drug gangs, they're very bad criminals. And how do we deal with this as libertarians? Well, one way to deal with this as libertarians is we legalize all drugs. Look, at one time there was alcohol prohibition. And anything you say about drugs, and I'm not talking about penicillin here, I'm talking about cocaine, marijuana, heroin, things like that, addictive drugs. Anything you say about those drugs, I can say about alcohol. And at one time there was prohibition of alcohol in the United States. And guess what? There were young Italian men shooting each other over drug turf. Nowadays in the United States, there are young black men shooting each other over drugs. I live in New Orleans, which is a very dangerous city, and one of the reasons that I teach at Loyola University in New Orleans, and one of the reasons it's so dangerous is because people are shooting each other over drugs. Well, does anyone shoot anyone over alcohol anymore? No. But the whole idea is ridiculous. You want alcohol, you go to the grocery store, they have alcohol. Nobody shoots anybody over that. It is a violation of rights to tell people that you can't use alcohol. I mean, we're adults, we're allowed to vote, alcohol or drugs, we shouldn't be allowed to vote. And if we are allowed to vote, then we should be allowed to be free to put harmful substances in our body. Now, I'm not favoring the use of drugs, and I'm certainly not favoring the use of alcohol. I'm just saying that the libertarian perspective or the libertarian stance on this is to legalize freedom, legalize everything except the violation of rights under the non-aggression principle. Okay, I've been at it for about 20 minutes, and my hope is that we can have some dialogue, discussion, questions, and objections, whatever. They say if you have 10 libertarians, you ask some question, you get 11 answers. Well, first I'll call on the young man who's in the lower right-hand corner, the one whose coat I was trying to grab, and then I'll call on other people, unless somebody else wants to call on people. I don't know how this is going to work, but why don't you start? And give me that code.
Thank you, Mr. Block. So we're inviting our friends that want to ask questions to come to the podium.
I'm sorry, I can't understand a word.
Walter, can you see me? I'm so delighted that you called me that young man. I think I'm older than you, but you and I met at a Liberty International conference in Norway. That was the first time we got together. Ken Schoolin, you remember me?
Oh wow, Ken, you're a young Ken. How old are you, Ken?
No, I'm much younger now that you've said this. I feel like 20 years old. I've been around Jose Cordero, and I'm younger and younger. In a couple of years, I'm going to be pre-born. I'm not even going to be I'm going to be a fetus.
Well, I'm 80 years old. I think I outrank you, so you should have more respect for me.
Okay, great to hear from you, Walter. I love your cases about roads and oceans and space, and of course, I've been dealing with this for years and so on, and I'd like to hear, how do you respond on the issue of property rights in oceans? Because they're fluid and they're going all over the place, and how do you designate property rights in that? And if you have time, well, there's a lot of other questions up here. What's the most controversial attacks that you've had to face in the last year? At any rate, deal with that only after you get with these other questions. Okay, thank you. Hey, and thanks for joining in this conference here. You're a very, very refreshing voice.
Mr. Block, we're going to take 3 questions. Sorry.
Let me just start with the Mississippi River. I'm more familiar with the Mississippi River. It runs right by Northern East than I am with rivers in South America. I think there's the Amazon River there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. I'm pretty sure of that. Oh, who should own the Mississippi River? Well, all the people that own, the people who use the Mississippi River, the people who put their labor in the Mississippi River. There are boats that go up and down the Mississippi River taking products all over the place. They should own some of it. The people who own land on the side of the Mississippi River, we assume that they've interacted with the Mississippi River. So now what you have is a Mississippi River Corporation, and it's got, 100,000 shares, and each person or company owns 1 share of the Mississippi River. And that's how the Mississippi River runs. Now, it was Katrina. The storm Katrina, which really missed New Orleans, but it was 40 miles east in Mississippi, and it killed 1,900 people. Now, if McDonald's killed 1,900 people, there'd be I wouldn't say there'll be no more McDonald's, but McDonald's would be under new management. Well, under whose management was the Mississippi River? The Army Corps of Engineers. Now, the humanist part of me says, well, this is a tragedy, 1,900 people died. The economist in me says, well, the key is that the people responsible for that are still in business. I have to read a quote from Thomas Sowell, one of my favorite economists. And Thomas Sowell says, it's hard to imagine a more stupid or a more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers was wrong, and they're still in there, and they paid no price. Robert Nozick very famously said that if you dump a can of, tomato juice into the ocean, you don't own a part of the ocean, you just wasted your tomato juice. Well, I disagree with that. I think if you dump a can of tomato juice into the ocean, you own 1/billionth of the ocean. Namely, all the people that use the ocean should own it. So who should own the Atlantic Ocean? The people who take boats back and forth. The people who live on the west coast of France or the east coast of South America. the east coast of the United States, east coast of Canada. Why should we do that? Why should we have ownership of the oceans rather than the tragedy of the commons? Because we have the tragedy of the commons. You have overfishing, and they have to have fishing seasons. Well, you don't have cow seasons. My best example of this is the buffalo and the cow. The buffalo and the cow, as far as I'm concerned, are the same animal. Now, the biologists would see distinctions, but they're the same thing. They're big, they're fat, they're smelly. You crash into one, you're in trouble. And yet one almost went extinct, and the other never came within 1 million miles of extinction. And we know which is which, and we know why, because the buffalo was not allowed to be owned. So if you killed one, you wouldn't have had one tomorrow anyway, so you might as well kill it. Whereas a cow, if you own a cow and you kill it, you don't have a cow tomorrow. So it's the same with the whales, with the salmon, with the fish, with the rhinoceros, with the elephants, although they're on land. But one reason on the ocean is to preclude the tragedy of the commons.
Hi, Professor. My name is Jeff Singer, and I'm a surgeon. I also I'm a senior fellow at Cato Institute. I'm very interested in the point you brought up before regarding vaccinations. Now, I know there has been a libertarian case made for it. In fact, philosophy professor Jason Brennan wrote a libertarian argument for it a few years ago, and I think Jessica Flanagan did as well. And it's based upon the externality question, of course. It's sort of like, it's been likened to if you're contagious, you could be like shooting a gun up in the air in a crowd and it can hurt people. But here's what I'd like to take the opposite view, which particularly it's easy with respect to COVID. When you're talking about vaccinating someone, first of all, there's never a guarantee that a person who hasn't gotten vaccinated will contract the illness and therefore be a threat to others by spreading it. You can never know that. There's also never a guarantee that, as we're learning now, especially that if you get vaccinated, that means that you will not contract the illness and spread it to others. By the way, this is a similar argument that you could use against preemptive war. So therefore, taking somebody physically and assaulting their body by injecting them with a vaccine that might, by the way, they may have an adverse reaction. And then you could have killed that person who may never have become infected and never been a threat to you. Now, to deal with the externality question, on the other hand, I think you do have a right, if somebody is contagious and could threaten everyone around that person, you have a right to quarantine them until they're no longer a threat to others. So I'm not against quarantining as a matter of the non-aggression principle, but I don't think that you have a right to forcibly vaccinate them. Now, in the particular case of COVID, the problem becomes even less an issue because now with vaccines readily available and the great majority of people who want to get vaccinated haven't gotten vaccinated, those people who choose not to get vaccinated, they're not really as much a threat to the people who choose to get vaccinated, and if anything happens to them, that's on them. Anyway, I just want to counter your case.
How dare you disagree with me? I hate you. I'm kidding. Very good question. I think very insightful. When I said that a case could be made in favor of vaccinating people, I mentioned arguendo, positing, and assuming. And you're quite right. The government has come nowhere clear to justify any of this. But suppose, just suppose for argument's sake, that the case had been made. One, that if you don't have the vaccination, you're going to be contagious and you'll kill other people. And two, it's not going to harm you. Just suppose. Well, then I think it would be justified. But you're quite right in saying that right now we have no such justification. I was making a hypothetical, a super heroic hypothetical. And I'm saying that there's nothing in libertarianism and the non-aggression principle that precludes that under certain weird assumptions. Namely, if you give me enough, what did they say? If you give me a long enough fulcrum and lever and fulcrum, I can move the earth. Well, if you give me enough assumptions, I can prove not anything, but I can prove a lot. Now, you're quite right about quarantine. There was Typhoid Mary, and she was working in a restaurant and giving other people typhoid, which is a dread disease, and she was properly quarantined, compulsory quarantine. So I don't think that the person who just spoke and I have any real differences. It's rather there was a misunderstanding. I was assuming heroic assumptions, and he is quite properly not willing to go along with me as that they were realistic. I agree, they're not realistic. But assuming that they were true, then and only then could we justify that. Now, with regard to externalities, I'm not a big fan of externalities. In economics, there's such a thing called market failure. And what are the market failures? One of them is externalities, one of them is monopoly, one of them is public goods and asymmetric information and inequality. There are hundreds of so-called market failures. When I was in graduate school, what I was taught is we want perfection, right? Yeah, sure, we want perfection. The market is imperfect, right? Yeah, sure, the market is imperfect. Therefore, government. That was what I was taught. The public choice people, God bless them, turned this around. They said, look, we want perfection, yes? Yeah, sure. The government is imperfect, right? Yeah, the government is imperfect. Therefore, we want free enterprise. I like that way of putting it a lot better. But they're both fallacious arguments. This idea of, externalities. You see what the external? There are two types of externalities. One is positive externalities, and what's a positive externality? They usually use education, and they say, well, the market will not produce enough education because people who decide to buy education in the free enterprise system will only consult their own personal benefits. They'll get a better job, they'll meet a better spouse, they'll have the joy of education, whatever. But they don't take into account the spillover effects or the third-party effects or the external effects, namely, there'll be a better voter, there'll be less likely to be a criminal, there'll be a better company, whatever. And when we take that into account, we should have more education and the government should subsidize education. Well, I think that's nonsense. Because look, right now I'm smiling at you, see? You know, I'm smiling, great smile, and I benefited you and I want you all to pay me $10. Well, that's the argument. And you didn't agree to pay me $10 just because I'm smiling at you. And if I would have come up to you and say, hey, give me the $10 or I'll shoot you, I'm the criminal. So that's nonsense. And you know, nowadays with, critical race theory and all sorts of socialism of the bad sort in education, one could make the case that it's not really an external economy, it's an external diseconomy. So what's an external diseconomy? The usual answer is pollution. The person who makes steel takes into account all the private costs. You know, you have to pay the labor, you have to pay the raw materials, iron and coal, you have to pay rent for the factory, you have to pay interest on when you borrow. And what they don't take into account is the third-party effects or the external effects, namely, they give other people emphysema because they have pollution all over the place. Well, that's not an externality, that's just a trespass. I mean, if you're going to send soot particles over onto other people's lungs, you're a criminal. What we should do is stop you from doing this. So I'm not a big fan of the externalities argument, but I do agree with the previous speaker that I'm not advocating coercive vaccinations. I'm just saying that we could justify it if we had enough assumptions to do that.
Hello, Mr. Walter Block. I'm Jorge Eduardo Castro from Colombia. I'm publishing books, and I sell books, and sell some of your books, and I'm happy to see you here. We are waiting for you in Medellin, in Colombia. So my question is, who has the right to privatize everything in the world? Because I have a practical question. You know, we have a problem, a technical problem in Colombia. It's called Venezuela. And in Venezuela at this moment, you have a disputed presidency. We have Maduro, we have Guaido, and also we have a process of privatization with guerrillas. You have in Venezuela FARC, ELN, also Hezbollah. So there is a kind of privatization for communism in Latin America that's called guerrillas. And I want to ask you, because I think we have almost something like Somalia in this moment in process in Venezuela. But for that reason, a person in Colombia who has this border, what can we do with the theory of privatization, and who has the right to privatize Venezuela in the actual moment? So, thanks.
Well, I'm not sure I got every jot and tittle of that question or that objection, but I'll do the best I can with it. What I got out of this was, who has the right to privatize? Anyone, everyone. We should all privatize everything. And the question is not so much who has the right to do it, but is it right to do it? And I think, yes, it's right to privatize things because there are only three possibilities. Either it's privately owned, or it's governmentally owned, or it's unowned. Those are the only three options. I can't think of a fourth option. Well, the problem with government ownership is you have socialism, and you were talking about Venezuela. Venezuela is one of the richest countries in Central or South America. Maybe, I think it was sixth richest in the whole world at one time, or some very, very high, wealthy part of Venezuela. And now look what happened to it under socialism. People are trying to leave, trying to get out of Venezuela. You know, we have other examples, North and South Korea, East and West Germany, the same culture, that is the Koreans and the Germans, the same culture, the same history, the same language, the same everything, and yet because of an act of war, an accident of war, the two split, North and South Korea, East and West Germany, and one went the socialist route, the other went little capitalist, some capitalism, and look what happened. North Korea is starving, East Germany is starving, people are trying to get it out of there. Now, the other thing I got from this question is immigration. I think, I'm not sure, I'm unclear, but immigration is a very important issue. What is the libertarian view on immigration? And here I would say that it's greatly divided. There is no one libertarian view. Well, I think my view is the only correct one, but there are three views, and two of them are incorrect. One of them is we should have open borders, and all the immigrants are great guys, and we should let them all in. The other view is a lot of immigrants are criminals, and we should have great restrictions on who we let into the country. My view is we should have open borders, and the immigrants are not all great guys, so we want to keep them out. We want to keep some of them out. Even if they're all good guys, suppose there were 1 trillion Martians that wanted to come to Colombia. Should the Colombians allow 1 trillion Martians or 1 trillion people? No, the place would be too crowded. So what's the solution? What is, in my view, the only correct view? The only correct view is open borders and privatize every square inch of the country. Every square inch. Now look, in my country, what is it, Alaska and Wyoming and the Rocky Mountains, there's stuff there, acres, square miles after square miles that's never been homesteaded. Suppose somebody from Mars comes to the middle of Alaska and starts homesteading. Did he violate any libertarian law? Do we have the right to tell him to go back to Mars? No, because he's homesteading it. Now, Hans Hoppe and I admire him greatly. He's one of the best theoretical libertarian theorists on the planet. He takes the view that the government really owns all of Alaska in behalf of the community, which seems to me to be a strange view for an anarcho-capitalist. I would say he's violated no rules whatsoever. We should leave him alone. And if we don't want him, then we privatize every square inch, and not only the land, but the water too. And then we can have our cake and eat it. We can pick and choose who we want to immigrate, and we don't have to violate libertarian law. You see, my claim is that Hans is violating libertarian law by saying that a foreigner can't come and homestead virgin territory. So that would be my answer to that. I hope that was part of the question. I'm not sure I got it, but it's certainly an interesting issue in any case.
Walter, thanks so much for this. I'm John Chisholm from San Francisco. I'd like to return to Ken Schulin's previous question about the oceans. And my question is, what's the best way to privatize them? What's the best way to get from here to there? The same issue applies, it seems to me, to the atmosphere. Do we need an international body to govern it? There are 7 billion people roughly on Earth, all of whom need to breathe. Are all of them entitled to 1/7 billionth ownership in the atmosphere? Every time someone is born, does that change your percentage slightly? If you could point us to the best articles or books that have been thoughtfully written about this, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Very, very good question. There are really two questions here, I think. One is, what's the best way to get to privatization? And my answer to that is convert everyone to libertarianism. And that's what we're doing here. We're having a conference to promote liberty. And the best, and I think the only way to get the libertarian program implemented is to convert everyone to libertarianism. And how are we going to do that? Well, this conference here, the Liberty International, used to be called ISIL, but they changed for obvious reasons. And I mentioned Mark, Live and Let Live, Mark Victor, universities, books, articles, Ayn Rand, Ron Paul. Convert more and more people to libertarianism, and then we'll have privatization. Now, with regard to the atmosphere, look, in order to get to own something, you just don't have to be alive. You see, that's the UN Law of the Sea Treaty. What the United Nations is saying that everyone owns 1/7 billionth of the oceans. Well, a lot of people in landlocked areas never touch the ocean. Why do they own anything? They shouldn't own it. Remember what I said with the Mississippi River, who should own it? I didn't say everybody in the United States should own it. I said the people who mix their labor with the Mississippi River, then you own part of the Mississippi River. If you didn't, if you live in California or Maine or Florida and you never came within 1 million miles of the Mississippi River, you don't own it. And when you're born, you don't own one extra amount. And it's the same with the oceans. The Pacific Ocean is not owned by people in Connecticut or people on the East Coast. Most of the people who touched it. You know, the Chinese, God bless them, what the Chinese did is that they took a bunch of semi-submerged rocks, namely when it was high tide, you couldn't see the rock. When it was low tide, you could see the rock. They brought a whole bunch of sand there, and they made islands, and, well, isn't that great? Now, it's true that they then said that they own 12 miles around there, which I think is nonsense, but they were privatizing the ocean. Well, not privatizing, but governmentalizing it. So that was sort of what is it, one step forward, one step back. At least they got us out of non-ownership into ownership, but they missed, they made it government ownership. I wanted to make it private ownership. So I would say convert everyone to libertarianism, and then whoever does the privatization wouldn't matter. We're all libertarians here, and we'll privatize everything. The other issue is the atmosphere. In order to have something privatized, it has to be scarce. It has to be a good. And right now, oxygen is not a scarce good on the earth. So you can't privatize things that are not scarce. And the atmosphere is not scarce. What we do with the atmosphere is we make sure that people don't be sending pollutants over onto other people's lungs or their laundry, getting it dirty, stuff like that. So that would be my response to that very important point.
Walter, thank you so much for participating. Maria Alejandra here. Thank you so much. Please give it to Walter Park. We hope to have you here soon in Colombia. Thank you so much for your time.
I wanted to say one more thing. The last question asked, well, how can we get more research on this stuff? Email me. Let me give you my email address. It's wblock, W-B-L-O-C-K, at loyno.edu. L-O-Y-N-O, Louis, Oliver, Yellow, New Orleans, .edu for education. So email me. Look, there are many other questions that I couldn't answer, and the people that want more research on this stuff, I can't give it in this presentation, but if you email me, again, wblock at loyno.edu, I will respond and we will cooperate with each other in that way. Thanks again for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Walter. I'll share your email with everyone. Thank you so much.